functionality. Okay, today we're going to begin lecture 30, and I'm going to try to cover some ground today, because the next 6 chapters are translations of terms, and each one is pretty quick, and hopefully we'll get through all 6 this time. It might be a little less exciting than some of the more philosophical ones, but when we hit 46, he's going to get back to some heavy-hitting philosophy, so we'll have fun with it, and hopefully we'll find some fun in this one too. So I'm up to chapter 40. Where he discusses the term Ruach. And again, true to the pattern of the Rambam, each and every one of these terms are terms that can lead one in the wrong direction as to how they understand God. So they're all terms that are often used in reference to God, or at least how he interacts with the world. And they're terms that, if not properly translated, could lead one in the wrong direction. And just think, as we go through this, think about how you could try to, how important translation is, and how important it is when you read, that you try to think, what in this context is the word really saying, so that you can make proper conclusions. So anyway, Ruach is the first one. Ruach is the word that's sometimes translated as air, and in this context, we should translate it as air, and you'll see why. Because Rambam was using the science of his day, understood that all matter was made of one of 4 elements, and those elements were air, water, ground, and fire. So air is one of the 4 elements. So Ruach is air, is a term denoting air, and I'm reading from the Pines, chapter 40. It's on page 90, and I might flip to Hebrew every once in a while. So which is so denoting air, I mean the element that is one of the 4 elements. Thus, and the air of God hovered. It says Ruach Elohim Rachefes, which gives you a little hint right there as to Rambam and how he understood Bereshis. He immediately reads into the pasuk of Bereshis, Ruach Elohim, in the beginning of creation, as the element of Ruach was Merachefet al Pnei Hamayim, over the element of water, looking at creation as starting from the basic building blocks of the elements and then building from there. And it's not only, so also in addition to air, it means what air, when air moves, when it blows. So in other words, the wind. So for example, where it says, and the east wind brought the locust, and so on, or Ruach Yam, meaning the wind that comes from the sea, or the and we have that use in many cases. It is also a term that means the animal spirit, meaning remember the spirit of life was often considered the breath. The breath is what differentiates things that are alive and things that are not alive. So any animal that has life in it has a ruach in it. So therefore it uses sometimes the term ruach to refer to that air. So that's how the word ruach sometimes is translated as spirit. For example, ruach holech v'lo yeshuv asher bo ruach hayim, anything that has the ruach of life, the wind or the spirit of life. So this also means, it also is a term denoting the divine intellectual overflow. And this is where it gets into godly matters. So Ruach also could mean, because Rambam is jumping from one to the other, each one leads to the next. Once you define Ruach as life, we think of life as what makes us closer to God, right? That spirit that's within us. So now the way that God talks or communicates intellectually with a prophet, communes or communicates with God, that is called a ruach. So it denotes the divine intellectual overflow that overflows to the prophets, and in virtue of which they prophesy, as we shall explain when we discuss prophecy. So he's not really touching on how prophecy works here, but it is a way of communication, and thus it sometimes it says, I will take of the air which is upon thee and I'll put it upon them, which means, which is in Hebrew, that is I'm sorry, I I will take from the Ruach, the spirit which is upon you, Moshe, and put it upon them. Vayi kinoach alehem haruach, when the spirit of prophecy rested upon the prophets and so on. So that's another place. So now the Ruach means something else. So then the use of this term is frequent. It is also a term denoting purpose and will. So for example, the pasuk in Mishlei, where it says, kol rucho yotzi kasil, a fool says his entire spirit, he says out his entire air. What does that mean? It means that when a fool reveals all of his cards. That's like the Mishlei, it's like a poker player who shows all of his cards to everyone. A fool, says everything that he wants. He just puts it all out there. He doesn't hold anything back to himself, even when it just doesn't, it's not a good idea to do that. Havanaso, in those cases, it means ritzono, he reveals his will. So for example, there are other places where it says the heir of Egypt shall be made empty within it, and I'll make void the counsel thereof. That is a pasuk in Yeshayahu and Isaiah, where the plans of Egypt, the desires of Egypt, he's talking about the time in the future, will not come to fruition. It says that Egypt's purposes will be divided, its governance will be hidden. Similarly, also in the verse, who hath comprehended the heir of the Lord? So what does that mean, the heir of the Lord? Right? So the Rambam is saying this, and I just want to make a note of this, that Ruach is something that people often, and especially in pagan cultures, the wind, in many cases, represented God blowing. If you think of God in an anthropomorphic way, and there's a wind, it's the wind of God, and there's gods of the wind and so on. Rambam is making it very clear that when the Torah talks about the wind of God, it's not referring to wind at all, even though it's using that term. So, and therefore he says, in all cases in which the term heir is applied to God, it's used in the fifth sense. The fifth sense meaning the will. The Ruach Elokim meaning the counsel, the way God communicates to prophets. In some of them also the last sense, which was referring to God's will, which is that of will, as we have explained. So the Ruach, look at the context when it refers to God. It's not referring, God doesn't blow. He's not a big guy with a huge set of lungs that can blow really hard, and that's how wind happens, but rather it's referring to either his will or the way he communicates with prophets. Thus, the term should be interpreted in every passage according to what is indicated in the context. Does anyone want to comment or have something to say about Ruach, about wind, before we move on to the next one?
Why doesn't he talk about creating by blowing air into Adam? I mean, isn't that the most obvious? He creates man by. Why doesn't that get used?
That's a very interesting question. Yeah, because that's everyone thinks that right away. But he doesn't. I don't know. I don't know why he doesn't mention that one. But he does tell us how we should understand it, right? But remember, in Rambam's day, they actually understood air as having in it the essence of life, right? On a scientific level. Although the truth is, it's not that far from what we know today. I mean, there is oxygen in the air, and we can't, at least our forms of life, can't live without oxygen. So it is kind of sort of life in it, right? But yeah, that's interesting. He doesn't bring up like the most popular verses that use the term. I don't know. Anyone have an idea? If not, any other comments on Ruach? All right. I'm going to try to knock out 6 chapters today. So we just did Ruach, and now we're talking about some other spiritual words. Is Nefesh, soul, is the next one. This is chapter 41. So Nefesh is also an equivocal term. It's also a term that has.
So I'm sorry. I was just I was trying to look this up in Breshit, the exact language that Jeff was referring to, and it says God formed man from the earth, but it doesn't say Ruach.
It says Vayipach ba'apav nishmas Ruach Chaim. Doesn't it say that? That's from my head.
Nishmat Chaim.
Oh, it doesn't say Nishmat Ruach Chaim. That's okay.
Yeah.
All
so
right,
that's
why.
That may be why he didn't answer. They didn't use it.
Why do I have that term in my brain? Maybe I don't know, but
maybe it's used elsewhere. But
yeah, it could be.
I was just trying to look to see. Anyway,
Okay,
sorry.
that's why he
interrupted, but-
didn't say. That's the thank you. Thanks. All right.
I think that's because I think the Michelangelo's picture is that in the.
No, I think we think of it. I think we think of it that way.
yeah,
And maybe there's
probably.
a midrash like to that effect, but
Maybe.
and
Yeah.
maybe
someone
we should
can
ask
Google
what
the Hebrew term nishmat ruach chaim and see what comes up.
the question is, what's the difference between nishmat chaim and ruach chaim?
Yeah, good question. I don't think we can answer that based on what we just read in chapter 40. But as we go through Nefesh, which we're about to do, and Chaim, which is we're also about to do, right? We might have some hints as to how to. He doesn't talk about neshama. It's not but in the chapters we're going to read today. But he is about to talk about a Nefesh and a Chai, a soul and a lot and life. So let's see what he says. Maybe we'll get some hints.
Yep.
All right. So the next one is Nefesh, which is a term denoting the animal soul common to every sentient being. And the translation that the Kapach uses is kol bal tichusha, which is any being that has feeling, any being that has some form of knowledge. So it's referring to all animals that are sentient. Is a reasonable translation. Thus, wherein there is a living soul, right? That's the verse Asher bo nefesh chaya, which is referring to all the animals. That's from Bereshit, right? And it is also a term. Okay, so then what substance is in the body that within which it was understood, at least in those times, contains the soul? It's the blood, right? So thou shalt not eat the soul with the flesh, right? The blood is actually referred to as the nefesh when it says lo tochal hanefesh im habasar, and it's referring to the blood. It is also a term denoting the rational soul. Okay, so now we're jumping to another thing. Now that we made it into a soul, right, and we made it into a I'm sorry, I was cooking something and it's beeping. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that. I just had to stop it from beeping. And anyway, nefesh, yeah. So then we jump from there to being the soul of the rational soul. In other words, our thinking capacity. So for the example here is the verse Chai Hashem Asher Asa Lanu Es HaNefesh Hazos, or or it's so, and so therefore it's also that part of us which remains after death, right? It's that thinking soul. Now this is important because Rambam is giving us a little hint of something he's going to address later in much more depth. But the idea that our intellect, our mind, is what lasts beyond life. And this is important when the Rambam develops his ideas about what it means when it says there's going to be a resurrection of the dead and so on. What exactly does that mean, and what the afterlife is about? Rambam is dropping us a little hint here, but it's the idea that our intellect lives on. To the extent that we develop it, it lives on. So that's another thing. So similarly, and deliver. Okay, so it is also a term denoting the will, right? In other words, so now that it means our intellect, it also refers to what we want to do, what we want to accomplish, right? So, for example, the le'esor sarav b'nafsho, right, which is to bind his princes according to his soul, which is a reference to which means, when a person is in charge of others and he wants to push them to do what he wants, right? To force them to do what he wants, it calls it his nefesh, which means through his will, right? Similarly, and deliver not thou him unto the soul of his enemies, right? Don't deliver him to the soul. What does it mean to the soul of his enemies? It means don't deliver him into a position where he will be forced to bend to their will. In my opinion, this is similar to where it says, if it be according to your soul to bury my dead, right? Where that's in Bereshit, that verse is right? If you desire to bury my dead, that's by Avram Avinu, right? So what does it mean with nafshechem? Meaning if it's your desire, if that's what you have in your mind, if that's what your hearts want to do. Okay. which means if it be according to, okay, similarly, though Moshe and Shmuel stood before me, yet my soul could not be toward this people. So that would be Moshe, Shmuel, if I ain nafshi el ha'mazeh, right? My desire, this is God speaking, is not to be engaged with these people. This is from Yirmiyahu, from Jeremiah, where God is saying, I'm not interested in these people anymore. Even if Moshe and Shmuel, those important leaders from the past, were standing in front of me, I had enough of them. Right? That is, I do not wish that they endure. I don't have no desire towards them. In all cases where the term soul is applied to God, it means his will, right? And this is important. So Rambam is pointing out, because there are those that would try to say, especially when you get into, the Rambam isn't addressing these Kabbalistic ideas, but the idea that our nefesh, our soul, is a chelek elokam imal, is a piece of God. You might want to jump to the conclusion that God is some sort of a great soul, right? Like we have souls, and then God is like a much bigger soul, a much more powerful soul, but still a soul. But no, Rambam wants to make it clear that that's not how it works, right? Soul uses the nefesh, it refers to his will, his desire, what he wants to happen. So for example, thou shalt do according to that which is in my heart and in my soul, right? The meaning of which is my will and purpose. One should interpret according to this sense. So now let's look at another purpose. So vatiktsar nafsho ba'amal Yisrael, right? Which is a verse in Shoftim, and his soul was grieved in the misery of Israel. What does that mean, right? Which means his will refrained from rendering Israel miserable. He didn't want the people of Israel to be in such suffering. So that's what it means that God's soul, there's no actual soul. We can't compare God to a soul, even though one might think, oh, that's a spiritual thing, but that's not the way it works. But it means that God didn't want that. He didn't desire that. So so this verse was not translated at all by Yonasan ben Uziel, right, in the Targum. So he took it as using the term soul in its first sense, and he thought that that he had met with. Let me see. I'm going to get to you in a second exactly what Yonasan ben Uziel says. It's interesting because Rav Kapach points out that when you look at the old versions of Tanakh until the recent century, all the old versions simply skip that phrase. Yonasan ben Uziel doesn't translate it, just like Rambam did. But in the newer version, someone stuck the words in va'akat nafshei ba'amal Yisrael, that God was disgusted with the misery of Israel. And Kapach says it's a maaseh shotimhu. He says they're foolish, stupid people, literally, that stuck that in as if they were amending Yonasan ben Uziel, where we know from the Rambam that Yonasan ben Uziel deliberately left out the translation of those terms. So the Rambam is explaining that Yonasan ben Uziel thought he had met with a case of affection being ascribed to God, and accordingly refrained from translating it. It sounded like God had like a desire, right? God was upset, so he just left it out. He didn't want to translate it because it was too troubling. However, Rambam says it shouldn't have been so troubling if you take it in the way I explain it. The interpretation of the verse is very clear. I just turned to page 92 now. For it is preceded by the statement that the providence of God may be exalted, had abandoned them so that they were perishing. It said before, the people were suffering and they implored God for help, and God did not help them. However, when they had gone far in repentance and their wretchedness had increased, and in other words, their suffering was so bad and they were turning back to God and the enemy had dominated them, he took pity on them, meaning his will refrained from letting their misery and wretchedness continue. So know this accordingly, for it is strange. It's an unusual occurrence. In the words of scripture, in the misery of Israel, in is used instead of from. So it is therefore as if he said from because remember, Vatiksar nafsho ba'amal Yisrael. It should have said, according to the way the Rambam is saying, it should have said me amal Yisrael. God was upset about the because of the misery of Israel. Why does it use bi? So the Rambam says no, bi is sometimes used and it actually means from. So therefore you can read the bet as if it was a mem. It is therefore as if he had said from the misery of Israel. So God's will, his desire was to relieve was to relieve the misery of Israel because he was upset about it. He didn't, meaning, what is it, does God get upset? No, it means that his desire was to help them, period. Thus, and that which remaineth in, and he gives examples for where the letter bet can be translated as a letter mem. This use is frequent. All right, so now we have, just to recap, the word nefesh, the word soul, jumps from being an animal soul to being the life of the animal, to being the blood of the animal, to being the will or the desire of a person to have a certain outcome. And that's what he used to tell us how to understand it when the word nefesh is used in reference to God. And importantly, he knocked away the idea that God is some kind of a soul, which is something that people could make that mistake. Any comments on the soul before we move on to the next one? Anybody have any questions, comments? If not, we'll move on to the next one. We did 2, there's 4 more. We'll see if we can get through all 4 tonight, maybe not, I don't know. Life, living, okay? Chai is, so some of the things that are characteristic of something that's alive is that it grows. It's interesting because I don't know necessarily that we would translate it that way today. You can probably think of living things that don't grow, but maybe, I don't know, maybe not, I don't know. Anyway, but that's obviously, most living things grow and is sentient. It has some experience. It experiences something. That's what sentience means. Thus, every moving thing that liveth, kol remes asher hu chai. So this would be, so once you call it living, it also then is sometimes used to mean getting to be cured, to get better, to recover from a severe illness. So, and thus you have examples of that. So vayichi mechalyo, right? That's in Isaiah, the famous the time when Chizkiyahu, King Hezekiah, got sick and he got better. So it says vayichi, right? It uses the language chai. But machaneh ad chayosam, they had to stay in the camp until they healed, right? Or v'chein basar chai, right? Healed the living flesh. So the way that chai means life and means healing. So the opposite word, mavet, death. So Rambam is translating that too, is a term meaning both death, and it could also mean severe illness. Just like chai means getting better from illness, getting healed, mavet, death, doesn't always mean actual death. It could also mean getting ill, getting sick. So thus, and his heart died within him, and he became as stone. This is in Shmuel Aleph, right, where Naval just got so upset and disappointed, he passed out, right, which refers to the severity of his illness. But it doesn't mean that his heart actually died. But it still says vayamas, right, that his heart died. On this account, Scripture makes it clear with regard to the sons of the woman of Tzarpat, right, that his sickness was so sore and there was no breath left in him. For if it had said and he died, it would have been possible to interpret this as meaning that he actually was in a case of severe illness, as Nova was in the last verse. So the question is, what did it mean there? So he says, some of the men of Andalusia means is Spain. That's how Rambam referred to Andalusia at the time, because it was under Muslim authority. Interpret the verses meaning that his breath was suspended so that no breath at all could be perceived in him. This was a state like probably in some sort of a near-death coma or something, as happens to people struck with apoplexy or asphyxia deriving from the womb, so that I don't know exactly what medical condition, but some form of coma. Anyway, so that could be also referred to as maves, as death, even though they're not actually dead. So I'm going to move on. The term living, okay, so now let's go back to living, is also used in the sense of acquisition of knowledge. So again, chai, because the significance of life is the sentience of the being that has life, therefore it can also be used to refer to acquiring knowledge. Thus, so they shall be life, excuse me, unto thy soul. From Mishlei. Give me 1 second, I'm sorry. I'm just going to get the Hebrew version of that. when it's referring to gathering knowledge, it says, "V'yihu chayim lenafshecha." The knowledge that you gain will be life to your soul. Remember what nefesh is, what he said before, acquiring knowledge, developing that brain, that knowledge that we have, that is bringing life to it. One who finds me, meaning this, and that reference is referring to the Torah, has found life. There are many such examples. The use is frequent. In accordance with it, correct opinion. So therefore, since life is therefore referring to knowledge, so now good knowledge is referred to life, and bad knowledge would be referred to as death. So correct opinions, meaning good, solid knowledge, is called life, and false opinions could be death. God may be exalted, says accordingly. So here's a famous, very famous verse. Re'ei nasati lifonecha hayom. Behold, I have given before you today et hachayim v'et hatov, life and good, v'et hamavet v'et hara, and death and bad. So what does this mean? How? So according to the way the Rambam is explaining it, right, he has thereby made it clear that good is life and evil is death, and explain these terms. So meaning good knowledge, good ideas, good Torah is tov, is good. Bad knowledge, bad ideas is ra, is bad. And that's how the Rambam would translate that verse. Of course, there'd be a lot of other ways we can translate it. Again, I made a similar interpretation that ye may live, right? So that's from the verse Leman Tichyun, analogous to the traditional interpretation of the stricture. So that it may. Wait, I'm sorry. I just have to check if it's about the hospital. I apologize. All right, I'm going to have to call it a quit after this one verse. We have like 2 minutes to discuss chapter 42, Chai, life. And then next week, we'll definitely finish the last 3 terms for this series, which is kanaf, wing, eye, which is ayin, and lishmoa, to hear. And then the Rambam is going to go on some really, really cool philosophy. But today we covered 3 terms, ruach, nefesh, and chai, which are all 3 very important terms. But I do have time to take some discussion of this. So if someone has any questions, go ahead. Are there any? If there isn't, we can call it a close. We are getting some
I
little.
think all of us don't want to. We have in mind a sick patient. We have in mind a sick patient, and no one has a question and preempts a sick patient.
All right. We're good. Okay, thank you very much, and have a wonderful week. I'm looking forward to next week. Okay.
Thank you.
Be well.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.